The wind moved low across the mountain trail, carrying dust pine scent and the sound of something forgotten by the world, a narrow wagon. Road cut through the high country where few dared to travel once the sun began its fall. This was land that swallowed the careless and tested the strong, a place where mercy was rare and survival was earned with blood and bone. On that cold stretch of earth a small figure stumbled forward, boots torn, dress heavy with dirt and shame. Each step was slow, each breath a struggle, and yet she kept walking because stopping meant vanishing. She was only 12, and already the West had decided she was done with its kindness. Her name no longer mattered to the town she came from, only the whispers mattered. The looks turned sharp, the doors that closed before she could knock. By the time she reached the mountain pass, the voices were gone, replaced by silence so deep it rang in her ears. Her hands trembled as she pulled her coat tighter, not against the cold alone, but against the fear growing inside her. A secret lived beneath her ribs, one that weighed more than hunger and heavier than the pack she carried. The mountains rose before her like judges made of stone, ancient and unmoved. They watched as she slipped, fell, and rose again. Blood marked the snow where her knee struck rock, but she did not cry. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. In the West, crying did not bring help, it only brought wolves. She had learned that lesson early, learned it when the wagon rolled away and no one looked back, when her own kin turned their faces as if she were already a ghost. Night came fast as it always did up high. The sky burned red, then faded to iron gray. Shadows stretched between the trees and every sound felt closer, sharper, more alive. She pressed on, driven by something she could not name. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the small life growing inside her, maybe it was the simple refusal to lie down and die where the world expected her to. She followed the trail because it was all she had left, and because the unknown ahead was less frightening than the past behind. Far above the road, hidden among timber and stone, a man watched her approach. His cabin sat deep in the high country, built by hands that had long since stopped shaking from war and loss. Smoke drifted from its crooked chimney, thin and cautious, as if even fire knew better than to announce itself out here. The man had chosen this place because people did not come here, and because memories did not follow easily into the mountains. His name was Elias Crow, though few still spoke it, and fewer still dared say it aloud. Elias had seen many things in his years: men broken by greed, towns rotted by fear, children forced to grow old before their time. He had sworn never again to step into the troubles of others. Out here, solitude was law and silence was safety. Yet, as he watched the girl stagger along the trail, something old stirred beneath his ribs, not pity, not kindness, but recognition. He knew the walk of someone who had nowhere left to go. The girl felt it before she saw it, the sense of being watched. Her spine stiffened and her steps slowed. The mountains were full of eyes, and not all of them were human. She clutched the small bundle she carried, ready to run, though she knew running would do little good. Her breath came fast and shallow, and she whispered a prayer she barely remembered, hoping someone somewhere might still be listening. Elias shifted his weight, the rifle steady in his hands. Out here, a lone figure could be a thief, a scout, or a trap meant to draw him out. That was how men survived, by assuming the worst. But as the girl lifted her face toward the trees, the light caught her eyes, and he saw the truth there. Not danger, not deception, only fear and exhaustion, carved deep into a child who should never have been alone in such a place. She collapsed just beyond the bend, knees giving way beneath her. The pack slipped from her shoulder and rolled into the snow. She did not scream. She simply lay there, chest rising and falling as if even breathing had become a burden. The mountain wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the long echo of all the times help had not come. For a long moment, Elias did nothing. The West had taught him that stepping forward often meant stepping into pain, yet it had also taught him that turning away left scars that never healed. He lowered the rifle and moved down the slope, boots quiet against the frozen earth. Each step toward the girl felt like crossing a line he had drawn years ago after burying everything he loved. When he reached her, she tried to pull away, fingers clawing weakly at the snow. Fear flared in her eyes, wide and desperate. Elias raised his hand, slow and careful, speaking softly, though his voice was rough from disuse. He told her she was safe, even as he knew safety was a fragile promise out here. He wrapped his coat around her thin shoulders and felt how light she was, how easily the wind might have carried her off if she had lain there much longer. She did not ask who he was. She did not ask where he came from. In the West, questions could be dangerous. Instead, she asked only one thing: whether she could stay just until morning. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Elias felt something break inside him that had been holding together for years. He nodded and lifted her gently as if afraid she might shatter in his arms. The cabin waited above them, dark and quiet. A place built for one man and his ghost, not for a child carrying a future she did not choose as they climbed. The trail together the mountains watched in silence. Snow began to fall soft and steady, covering their tracks, erasing the path behind them. As the door closed against the night, the wind howled, louder as if warning that nothing in the Old West came without a cost. And somewhere far below the town that cast her out slept peacefully, unaware that a choice had been made in the high country, a choice that would stir old sins, awaken buried truths, and challenge the kind of justice the West believed it understood. The girl had arrived at the edge of survival, and the mountain man had stepped forward when no one else did. What followed would not be gentle, and it would not be forgiven easily, but it would be remembered. Long after the trail forgot their footprints, the cabin stood crooked against the slope as if it had grown there rather than been built. Walls darkened by years of smoke and weather leaned into the wind while the roof groaned under fresh snow. Elias pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside, carrying the girl as though she weighed nothing. The warmth hit them slowly, firelight flickering across rough timber and iron tools hanging where hands once reached without thinking. This place had not known another soul in a long time, and it seemed to hold its breath at her arrival. He laid her down on the narrow bed made of pine boards and old blankets. The mattress creaked in protest, and the girl flinched awake, eyes wild, hands gripping the air. Elias stepped back, giving her space like one would with a wounded animal. He kept his voice low and even, telling her she was safe, telling her the storm would not reach them tonight, telling her she could rest. She listened without speaking, watching him as though memorizing the shape of him in case she needed to remember this moment later. The fire cracked and popped, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. The girl pulled the blanket tighter around herself and finally let her eyes close just a little, not fully, not deeply. Out in the wild, sleep was a gamble, and trust was more dangerous than hunger. Elias turned away, pretending to busy himself with the kettle, though his thoughts stayed fixed on the small shape behind him. He wondered how long she had been walking, how many nights she had slept, with nothing but the sky above her and the ground beneath. When the kettle steamed, he poured water into a tin cup and set it within her reach. The smell of warmth and iron filled the room. She drank slowly, hands shaking so badly the water sloshed over the rim. Elias noticed bruises on her wrists, marks of hard fingers and harder words. He said nothing, because the West taught men that some truths came out only when they were ready, and some never should be forced at all. Outside, the wind rose, clawing at the cabin walls like something alive. Snow struck the shutters with a sound like thrown gravel. Elias checked the door, then the window, moving with quiet purpose. This storm would keep them hidden at least for a while. He fed the fire and sat on the bench opposite the bed, his rifle resting nearby, more out of habit than fear. His eyes never fully left the girl. She woke again sometime later, breathing fast as if pulled from a bad dream. She whispered a name, maybe her own, maybe someone else. Elias leaned forward, asking softly if she was hurt. She shook her head, then hesitated and placed a hand over her stomach. The gesture was small, but it spoke louder than any confession. Elias felt the weight of it settle over him, heavy and cold. He had seen enough in his life to understand what that meant, and enough to know how cruel the world could be to those who carried such a truth. He did not ask how it happened or who was responsible. The mountains had taught him that judgment did not heal wounds. Instead, he told her she could stay until the storm passed. He told her there was food and a place to rest, and that no one would bother her up here. She searched his face for deception and found only exhaustion and something like resolve. At last, she nodded and lay back against the pillow, eyes drifting shut for real this time. Hours passed, marked only by the fire settling into embers. Elias did not sleep. He sat listening to the wind and the sound of her breathing steady. At last, his mind wandered to things he had buried years ago. A woman with a laugh like summer rain, a small grave on the edge of a battlefield, a promise he had failed to keep. He wondered if this was punishment or redemption come knocking at his door, wearing the face of a child. Morning crept in slow, and gray light filtered through the frost on the window, painting the cabin in pale silver. The storm had passed, leaving the world hushed and new. Elias stirred the fire and set about making a thin stew from dried meat and roots. The smell woke the girl, and she sat up cautiously as if unsure the night had been real. When he handed her the bowl, she accepted. it with both hands, murmuring thanks so quiet it almost vanished into the air. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoon against tin. When she finished, she asked where she was. Her voice was steadier now, but still carried the edge of fear. Elias told her she was in the high country, far from the road, far from towns that asked questions. He told her his name and waited. She hesitated, then gave him hers, a name worn soft by use, but still strong enough to stand on its own. Saying it seemed to ground her, reminding her she still existed. Days followed in a rhythm Elias had nearly forgotten. He showed her how to stack wood, how to keep the fire breathing, how to set a snare without losing fingers. She watched closely, learning fast survival written into her bones by necessity. At night she slept deeper each time, though sometimes she woke shaking, and Elias would sit nearby until the tremors passed, never touching unless she reached for him first. Yet peace never lasted long, and the west tracks appeared near the trail leading up from the valley. Bootprints, fresh and careless. Elias spotted them while checking his traps. His jaw tightened. He knew what followed. Rumors always did. Men came looking either for reward or righteousness, neither of which boded well for a child with a secret and a mountain man with a past. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the peaks, Elias told the girl they might have to move higher if trouble came. She nodded, gripping the edge of the table, her eyes dark with understanding. She had been running her whole life, it seemed, and though she was tired, she was not surprised. The West had never promised her rest. As night fell again, the cabin seemed smaller, the shadows longer. Elias cleaned his rifle with practiced care. The girl watched him, her trust quiet but growing. Outside an owl cried, and somewhere far below a dog barked, carrying too clearly on the cold air. Elias met her gaze, and for the first time spoke a truth he had avoided. He told her that the world did not forgive easily, and that some men believed cruelty was justice. He told her that up here they would face whatever came together. The fire burned low as the mountains listened. Snow began to fall again, soft and steady, erasing tracks and hiding truths. For now the cabin stood as a refuge, balanced between what had been lost and what might yet be saved. And neither of them knew that the silence they shared was already being hunted by those who feared what they could not control. Morning came sharp and bright, the kind of mountain morning that cut through bone and thought alike. Frost clung to the trees and turned every branch into a blade of white glass. Elias stood outside the cabin, studying the land the way a man reads a warning sign. He crouched low, brushing snow aside until the truth showed itself clear as blood. Tracks crossed the slope below, boot marks, deep and careless, heading uphill toward the cabin. Someone was coming, and they were not afraid of being seen. Inside, the girl stirred, sensing the change. Before Elias said a word, she had learned that silence could scream louder than any shout. She pulled on her Boot's hands steadied, despite the fear curling in her chest. When Elias came in, his face was hard set, like stone shaped by years of hard choices. He told her there were men on the mountain, and that they would not stop just because the snow asked them to. She nodded, once already understanding that safety in the West was never permanent. They moved quickly, packing what little could be carried. Elias wrapped dried meat and tools, while the girl folded the blanket with care, as if the act itself might bring comfort. She slipped a small bundle of her few belongings into her pack and hesitated at the door, taking one last look at the room that had given her warmth when the world had offered none. The cabin had been more than shelter. It had been a pause in the storm of her life. They left before the sun climbed too high. Elias led her up a narrow ridge path hidden from the main trail. The snow grew deeper with every step, and the air thinned, biting at the lungs. The girl stumbled once, and Elias caught her without thinking. His grip was firm, steady, reassuring. She did not pull away this time. Instead, she leaned into his strength, trusting it without question. By midday, the wind shifted, carrying voices faint but unmistakable. Men shouting orders, men laughing, the sound harsh against the clean mountain air. Elias motioned for silence and guided her behind a stand of fir trees. From their cover they watched as 3 riders appeared below, coats dark against the white land, rifles slung easy like tools used often. The girl felt her stomach twist, not just from fear, but from the knowledge that these men would see her not as a child, but as a problem to be erased. Elias counted them, then listened harder. He heard more horses further back, hidden by the slope. His jaw tightened. A posse, then, or something close enough. The town had not forgotten her. After all, the West rarely did once it decided you were guilty of something, whether you chose it or not. They moved again, climbing higher where the snow softened in muffled sound. The girl's breath came fast, but she did not complain. Each step burned her legs, yet she pushed on, driven by something deeper than fear. Elias watched her from time to time, noting the way she carried herself, how pain did not stop her, how survival had become second nature to her, at an age when children should have known nothing but play. As afternoon waned, they reached a narrow shelf overlooking a deep ravine. Elias knew this place well. He had hunted here, trapped here, hidden here during years, when he wanted nothing more than to disappear. He led the girl into a shallow cave masked by hanging rock and brush. Inside, the air was still and smelled of damp stone. He told her to stay quiet no matter what. She nodded, pressing herself against the cold wall, hands folded over her stomach as if guarding the life within. Hours passed, slow and tense outside. The sound of riders drew closer, hooves crunching, snow, voices rising in frustration. Elias knelt at the cave mouth, rifle ready, heart steady. The past felt close now, riding up the mountain with iron and judgment. He remembered other men like this, other hunts, other days when the line between right and wrong blurred into something ugly. The voices stopped below the shelf. One man shouted that tracks led higher. Another argued that no one could survive up there in winter. A third laughed, saying mountain men were ghost stories told to scare children. Elias felt a grim smile tug at his mouth. He had become a story once, and it had nearly killed him. A rifle cracked, the sound ripping through the canyon, a warning shot meant to flush prey. Elias flinched. Despite himself, the girl gasped, then bit her lip, forcing silence. Elias turned and met her eyes, steadying her with a look. He would not let them take her. He had decided that the moment he saw her, lying broken on the trail. The riders split, searching. One dismounted and began climbing toward the shelf. Elias waited, counting breaths, measuring distance. The man cursed, slipping in the snow, struggling upward, closer, closer. Elias could see his face now, young, hardened already by the belief that the world owed him obedience. When the man reached the edge, Elias stepped out, rifle raised. His voice carried clear and strong, telling the man to stop, to turn around, to go back the way he came. The rider froze, shock flashing across his face before anger took its place. He lifted his own rifle, hands shaking just enough to be dangerous. Time stretched thin. Elias saw the future unfolding, blood on snow, cries echoing through stone. He fired first, the shot ringing like thunder. The bullet struck the man's shoulder, spinning him backward into the ravine. His scream cut off as he fell, swallowed by distance and rock. The mountain went still, then chaos erupted. Shouts filled the air, horses reared, men scrambled. Elias retreated into the cave, grabbing the girl, pulling her close. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of what he had done. He knew there would be no turning back now. The West would not forgive this. They fled as the posse regrouped. Elias led them along a path known only to him, a descent through broken rock and frozen brush. Bullets snapped past, striking stone, sending shards flying. The girl stumbled again, and Elias half carried her down the slope, boots sliding, breath burning. As dusk fell, they reached the ravine floor, shadows long and deep. Elias pushed on, knowing night was their only ally. They crossed the frozen stream, ice cracking beneath their weight. The girl cried out once when her foot slipped into the water. Elias hauled her free, wrapping her leg tight with cloth to keep frost at bay. He whispered that she was doing well, that they were almost clear, though he knew the truth was far harsher. Behind them, torches flared, dots of fire against the dark men, shouting promises of justice and punishment. The girl clutched Elias' coat, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. She asked him if this was her fault. The question struck him harder than any bullet. He stopped, turned to her, and told her no. Not now, not ever. He told her the world had failed her long before today, and that he would not fail her now. They moved into the night, two figures against an endless land, hunted but unbroken. The mountains closed around them, hiding their path. Swallowing sound, snow began to fall again, gentle and relentless, covering blood and tracks alike. Somewhere behind them, the riders pressed on, unaware that the hunt had already changed both hunter and hunted forever. Night wrapped the ravine in a heavy cloak, broken only by the groan of ice and the distant shouts of men who believed they were right. The moon hid behind clouds, leaving the world painted in shadow. Elias moved with purpose, guiding the girl along the frozen stream until the canyon walls closed tight around them. Every sound felt louder here, the scrape of boots, the crack of ice, the girl's labored breath. Yet the mountains still listened, keeping their secrets as they always had. The girl stumbled again, her strength thinning like the air around them. Elias stopped without hesitation, lifting her onto his back, though the climb ahead would punish them both. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, light but trusting. He felt a tremble in her body, not just from cold, but from the strain she carried within. and the fear she refused to speak. He told her to hold on and leaned into the slope, letting muscle and memory do the work words no longer could. They climbed where few dared, jagged stone biting through worn solid snow, giving way beneath each step. Above them the ridge loomed, a dark promise of either escape or death. Elias chose it without doubt. He had chosen harder paths before and lived, though the cost had never been light. He felt it again now, that familiar ache of sacrifice settling deep in his bones. Behind them torches flickered closer, the posse relentless, driven by outrage and the hunger to see punishment done. Elias knew their kind. Men who believed the law lived in their hands and that mercy was weakness. He had once ridden with men like that before the war broke them into something. Worse, he would not let that world touch the girl on his back. Near the top, the wind returned fierce and cutting, stealing breath and balance. Elias slipped once, nearly losing them both. The girl gasped, tightening her grip, but did not scream. She whispered his name, not in fear, but as a plea to keep going. That sound gave him strength greater than any oath. He pushed on, hauling them over the ridge and into a stand of twisted pine where the land leveled just enough to rest. He set her down gently, checking her leg where the ice had bitten. The skin was pale and angry, but intact. He bound it tighter, tearing cloth from his own shirt. To do it, she watched him work, eyes filled with something new, not just gratitude, but belief. Belief that someone had chosen her not out of duty or pity, but out of will. They moved again, slower now, conserving strength. The ridge path wound toward an abandoned mining camp Elias remembered from years past. A place the mountain had reclaimed, crooked shacks, half-buried shafts, yawning black and hungry if they could reach it. They might hide long enough for the storm that brewed above them to erase the hunt entirely. Snow began to fall thick and fast, the sky lowering around them. The posse's shouts faded, muffled by the storm. Elias allowed himself a breath, but not relief. The mountains demanded payment, and they had not yet named the price. They reached the camp as darkness deepened. Broken timbers creaked in the wind, and old iron sang soft with cold. Elias chose a shack with 3 walls still standing and pulled the girl inside. He blocked the entrance with scrap wood and fed a small fire, careful to keep the smoke low. The girl sank down exhausted, her head resting against the wall. Her face was pale, but her eyes still burned bright. She asked him then why he had done this, why he had turned his life upside down for someone he had never known. Elias stared into the fire, watching the flames twist and curl. He told her that once. Long ago, someone had needed him, and he had not been there. He told her the mountains had given him a long time to think about that failure, and that sometimes the past returned asking for balance. She listened without interrupting, absorbing his words like heat from the fire. Outside, the storm raged, burying tracks, and men alike. Torches died one by one until only darkness remained. The posse would have to choose whether to press on blind or turn back and wait. Either way, the mountain would decide their fate, not them. Hours passed. Elias drifted in and out of sleep, alert to every sound. The girl slept fitfully, murmuring names he did not know. At some point her hand found his sleeve, clutching it tight. He did not pull away. Instead, he kept watch until dawn threatened the edges of the sky with pale gray. Morning revealed a world reborn under fresh snow. The camp lay silent, pristine, as if untouched by human struggle. Elias stepped outside, scanning the ridge. No riders, no tracks. Only wind and white. He allowed himself a thin smile, but it faded quickly. He knew this was not the end. The town would not forget. The West rarely did. When he returned inside, the girl was awake, sitting up slowly. Her face held resolve beyond her years. She told him she was tired of running. She told him she wanted to live, not just survive. The words struck him deep because they echoed a truth he had long ignored. Elias knelt before her and told her that living in the West meant standing your ground even when the ground shook beneath you. He told her it would be hard and dangerous and that people would judge her for things she never chose. She met his gaze unflinching and said she already knew all that. Together, they left the camp, heading deeper into the high country toward a place Elias had sworn never to return, a valley hidden beyond the peaks where the land opened, gentle and green in summer and harsh but honest in winter, a place where he had once dreamed of a life he thought lost. Forever, the mountains watched them go, silent and patient as ever, knowing that every path chosen came with a reckoning yet to be paid. The valley opened before them like a breath held too long. Finally released snow, thinned here, broken by dark earth and the stubborn green of pine that refused to bow to winter. Elias slowed his pace as they crossed the last ridge, memory weighing heavy on every step. This place had once been a Promise whispered between dreams a future imagined beside a woman whose laughter still echoed in his mind. Now it stood quiet waiting to see what kind of man would return and what burden he would carry with him. The girl felt the change as well. The land seemed softer though, no less wild. She straightened, despite the pain in her leg eyes, taking in the curve of the valley, the frozen creek winding through it like a silver scar. She asked if anyone lived here. Elias shook his head, telling her that no one stayed long. Not after what had happened. The West was full of places marked by loss, and this was one of them. They reached a small cabin half buried in drift and time, built sturdier than the one they had fled. It stood stubborn against the cold. Elias cleared the door and pushed inside. The scent of old smoke and pine filled the air. A table stood where he remembered it. A chair lay broken on its side, just as it had the day he left. Nothing here had moved, because no one had dared to remember. They settled in slowly. Elias lit a fire and melted snow while the girl rested. She winced as she moved, and he saw the truth she tried to hide. The journey had taken more from her than she admitted. He brought her water and wrapped her tighter in blankets. His hands lingered uncertain, then steadied. She no longer flinched at his touch, and that trust both comforted and frightened him. As night fell, the valley filled with sound, wind through branches, ice shifting deep underground, the long call of something wild far off. The girl stared into the fire and finally spoke the question that had been waiting. She asked what had happened. Here Elias took a long breath and told her the truth. He told her of a homestead dream of land, worked by honest hands, of a woman who believed the West could be tamed. He told her of a sickness that came fast and left nothing behind, of a grave dug too shallow because the ground had been too hard. He told her he left because staying meant dying slowly. She listened without interrupting, absorbing the weight of his story as if it were another lesson survival demanded. When he finished, she told him quietly that loss did not mean a place was cursed. She said sometimes land waited for someone brave enough to try again. Elias looked at her, then really looked, and saw not a child broken by cruelty, but a soul tempered by fire. Her strength humbled him. The next days passed in cautious calm. Elias hunted close, bringing back rabbit and grouse. The girl learned the shape of the valley, the safe paths, the places where snow hid danger. She moved slower now, but with purpose. Each night Elias checked the ridges for signs of pursuit and found none. Yet unease lingered in him like a storm that had not yet shown itself. It came on the fourth morning. The sound of a horn carried faint but clear from the far pass. Elias froze, listening again. There it was, unmistakable, a signal used by men who knew how to coordinate a search. The posse had not given up. They had split up, spreading wide like a net drawn tight. Elias told the girl they might have to make a stand. Her eyes widened, then hardened. She asked what she could do. He hesitated, then answered honestly. He told her how to load the spare rifle, how to stay low, how to listen for his call. She nodded, committing each word to memory. Fear sharpened into resolve. They took positions as shadows lengthened. Elias watched the ridge through a narrow slit between logs. The first rider appeared just before dusk, then another. They moved careful, now wary of ambush. These men were learning, and that made them dangerous. A voice rang out from below, calling Elias by name. The sound rolled across the valley, carrying accusation and certainty. The girl stiffened, hearing it. Elias felt a chill colder than the wind. The past had found him. After all, the voice belonged to the sheriff, a man who believed order came from the barrel of a gun, and that mercy weakened law. The sheriff called again, offering terms. Come down alone, leave the girl behind, let the law decide. Elias laughed, once bitter and loud enough to carry. He shouted back that the law had already failed her, and that he would not deliver her to another grave. The valley held its breath, waiting. Shots came, sudden, splintering wood and stone. Elias returned fire, measured and precise. A rider fell screaming. Another ducked for cover. The girl stayed where he had told her, heart pounding, ears ringing. She clutched the rifle, not firing, yet not frozen either. Smoke filled the air, sharp and choking. Elias moved fast, changing position, firing again, keeping them pinned. He knew they were outnumbered, and time was against them. The sheriff would not retreat, not now, not with pride and authority on the line. A bullet struck Elias' shoulder, spinning him hard. He bit back, a cry, blood soaking his sleeve. The girl saw it, and fear threatened to break her resolve. Elias shouted that he was fine. Even as pain flared white-hot, he dragged himself to cover, reloading with shaking hands. The sheriff advanced, shouting that this did not have to end badly. Elias shouted back that it already had for too many. He glanced at the girl, meeting her eyes. Across the cabin, she shook her head, refusing the unspoken goodbye. She raised the rifle hand steady now and fired. The shot cracked clean, striking near the sheriff, forcing him back. Surprise rippled through the posse. They had not expected her to fight. Night fell hard and fast. The battle slowed, both sides wary. The wind rose, carrying snow that blurred vision and muffled sound. Elias slumped against the wall, strength fading. He knew the mountain would soon choose. He reached for the girl, pulling her close, and told her to listen carefully. When he gave the word, she was to run for the creek and follow it until the valley opened. He pressed a small compass into her hand, the last thing he had kept from his former life. She refused, shaking her head, tears freezing on her lashes. Elias cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. He told her she had already survived what should have destroyed her. He told her her life mattered beyond this valley, beyond him. The mountains would remember her courage, even if the world never did. Outside, boots crunched, closer, voices low and determined. The sheriff called once more, offering one last chance. Elias answered by standing tall, despite the wound, rifle raised, defiant. The girl realized then what he intended, and her chest tightened with grief and understanding. The valley watched as it always had. Snow fell, heavier, erasing lines between right and wrong, between sacrifice and survival, between a man seeking redemption and a child fighting for a future. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, knowing that when it broke, nothing would ever be the same. Snow fell thick and heavy, turning the valley into a white curtain that swallowed sound and sense alike. Elias stood at the cabin doorway, blood soaking his sleeve, breath coming shallow, yet his spine remained straight. The rifle felt heavier now, but his grip did not falter. Across the clearing, shadows moved, boots crunching, slow and careful. The men below believed time was on their side, that pain and numbers would finish what bullets had not. Inside the cabin, the girl pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding so loud she feared it would give her away. She clutched the compass in her fist, the metal biting into her palm, grounding her in the moment. Elias' words echoed in her mind, urging her to live, to run, to carry forward what the West tried to bury. She hated the thought of leaving him, hated it more than the fear of dying. Yet she understood something deeper now, that survival was not always about staying but about continuing. The sheriff stepped into view, hat pulled low, eyes hard with certainty. He raised his voice, cutting through the snow, telling Elias this was his last chance. The law would show mercy if Elias stepped aside, if he let the girl come down peacefully. Elias laughed, weak but defiant, the sound raw from blood and cold. He answered that mercy demanded choice, and the girl had been denied, that since the day the world turned its back on her. A shot rang out, shattering the standoff. Elias fired, first the recoil tearing at his wounded shoulder. The bullet struck a tree, sending splinters flying. Men shouted, returning firewood exploded around the cabin. Smoke and snow mixed into a choking haze. The girl dropped low, crawling toward the back, as Elias had shown, her heart breaking with every step away from him. Elias fired again and again, buying her time. Each pull of the trigger felt like tearing muscle from bone, but he welcomed the pain. It meant he was still standing, still choosing. His mind drifted briefly to the woman he had loved, to the valley, as it once was, green and full of promise. He wondered if she would forgive him for how this would end. The girl reached the rear of the cabin. The door was jammed with ice, and fear lent her strength. She forced it open, slipping into the storm. The wind hit her hard, stealing breath and balance. She stumbled, then caught herself, remembering the creek, the compass, the words that mattered most. Live behind her, the fight roared louder. Bullets cracked, men yelled orders. Elias' voice cut through, once shouting her name, not in fear, but in command. That was the word she had been waiting for. She ran. Her boots hit snow and ice as she reached the creek, sliding down the bank. Water black and fast beneath the frozen skin. She followed its edge, just as he had said, using the sound to mask her escape. Tears streamed down her face, freezing before they could fall. She did not look back, because she knew if she did, she would turn and never leave. At the cabin, the sheriff pressed forward, believing victory close. Elias stepped out into the open, forcing their attention, drawing fire away from the valley path. He fired until the rifle clicked empty. Then he stood there, tall, unarmed, refusing to kneel, refusing to beg. Snow coated his hair and beard, turning him into part of the mountain itself. The sheriff raised his gun, hesitation flickering. Just once he saw not a criminal, but a man who had chosen something greater than himself. That hesitation cost him. Elias lunged, knocking the gun aside. They grappled in the snow, fists and rage and years of belief colliding. The wound weakened Elias, yet he fought with everything left, clawing for balance, for dignity, for the chance that the girl might live free. A rifle but struck his back, dropping him to his knees. The world narrowed to breath and pain. The sheriff stepped close, ending it with a single shot that echoed through the valley and then was gone, swallowed by snow and silence. The storm raged, erasing footprints, blood memories. Men stood quiet, unsure for a moment what they had won. The sheriff ordered them back, claiming justice had been done, yet the valley knew better. The mountains always did. Far down the creek the girl ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She collapsed beneath a pine, clutching the compass, sobbing into the snow. The night stretched endless around her, but dawn would come as it always did. She slept there, wrapped in grief and resolve, guarded by the land that had taken so much and given her one last chance. Morning found her a live frost clinging to her hair, eyes swollen but clear. She rose and followed the creek until the valley opened, just as Elias promised. Beyond the ridge lay land untamed and uncertain, but hers to face. She walked on, carrying his courage, his sacrifice, his belief that the West could still be better than it was. Years would pass and stories would spread of a mountain man who stood against the town and of a girl who vanished into the high country. Some said she died, others said she grew strong and built a life far from judgment. The truth lived quieter, carried in the way the valley bloomed each spring, and in the strength of a woman who never forgot what it meant to be chosen when no one else would. And in the end, what remained was not blood or law or fear, but a legacy written into stone and wind that even the wild old West could not erase.